Internationally acclaimed and Academy Award-winning director, Sidney Pollack. So what makes a good movie, sir?
I don't have any idea. You can't answer it. That's too simple a question. You can't answer a question like that. What makes a good movie is a movie that somebody likes, that pleases people. There isn't any one general definition of a good movie. There are many, many, many different kinds of good movies.
Name a couple of good movies you've made.
Oh, that's not for me to say. That's for other people to say.
Well, let me ask you this. Values and redemption seem to be a big part of many of the movies that you've produced in your history. Can you tell us about what a big part that plays in your decisions to make a movie?
Well, you can't make a movie without understanding in some way what the feelings and wishes of the characters are, and if they move you, you can get passionate about making those movies. I mean, I don't think about it in terms of, I don't look for themes of redemption or anything like that when I make a movie. Some of the movies I've made have had characters who redeem themselves in them, but that isn't something that I sit down and look for. I look for a story that has people in it that I care about or get interested in, where I feel like I want to live a certain amount of my life with those people's concerns.
One of the things that you're just a master at, and that's character development. Character development of the people involved in your movies. For example, in Jeremiah Johnson and in 3 Days of the Condor, the character development on multi-levels of different types of people that were involved in those films were fantastic. How do you particularly draw out the character of from your stars?
Well, first I pick real good actors, and then my job is pretty easy. Redford had a real strong feeling for both of those roles. The situations were clear to him. My job was really to be an audience more than anything else. My background was as an actor, and I spent a lot of years teaching acting, so I have an affinity for working with actors.
You're also very good at background information. You really dig up, you go to no ends. Many of your interviews have told about the fact that you really get involved in the individual issues. In particular, in Jeremiah Johnson, you did a lot of research before that show, too. How much input did you have on the actual writing of that show?
Well, the director always works very closely with a writer on a script. Sometimes you work with them from the beginning, and sometimes you work with them later after they develop something. In the case of Jeremiah Johnson, there was a first draft screenplay already written when I got involved, but I brought in 2 new writers and took it in an entirely different direction. Can I ask you a question? I'm not moving, and you keep moving that and pushing a button. Can I ask what you're doing?
Sure, just making you look good, actually.
No. Well, what are you pressing? What's the button?
That's just the zoom.
Oh, you're zooming different.
Yeah, just
sizes.
to cause you a little
Okay, I
action.
didn't know what you were doing.
No,
I haven't changed position.
No, I'm just trying to bring a little life to the process here.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure what you were doing. Okay, so next question.
Yes, let's move from Jeremiah Johnson then to 3 Days of the Condor, which was a very important breakthrough movie in 1975 because of the fact of the Watergate and all those kinds of things. How much effort did you put into the writing of those? There's some great keeper lines in that show.
Well, you work very, very closely, as I said, with the writer. I mean, the writer that worked on Condor is the writer that's worked on every film I've made with Redford. He's worked on almost every film I've made. There are only 2 films I've made that he didn't work on. And I worked very closely with him and have for 35 years. you know, I work line by line and page by page with him. I send him off and he does a draft, and then we'll sit down and go over it page by page and line by line and work on it together. And then I may send him off alone to do a new scene or a re-attempt at another scene, and then we'll sit down together and go through that scene, sort of page by page and word by word. I'm not a writer, but I work very, very closely with this particular writer. I work in the same room with. Other writers that I don't know so well, I would probably work with in a different way.
Let's switch gears a minute on directors in general. They, you've mentioned in other interviews that they have more or less godlike powers. They get to call a lot of shots on a lot of different issues. And
I said they had godlike powers. I don't.
Well, I'm certainly reading into that. But what I was suggesting is that who's the most powerful person on the set other than the director? Then?
No. The director is the leader of the team, but I would never say he had godlike powers.
Well, how did you choose? For example, let's go back to the Condor story there. How much input did others, producers, associate producers, executive producers, distributors have on the actual input of that story?
No, I mean, you're asking two different questions. If
Okay.
you're asking who's the final authority on a set, it's the director.
That's what I'm saying.
But you said that I said that the director has godlike powers. I never said.
You never said that. Well, what I was suggesting is that you do get to choose the music.
Well, you choose everything.
Yeah, and you get to choose the film editor, and you get to choose.
That's the job. That's what directing is.
Right, right.
That's what it's about. That's what the name means. You direct the picture. You direct everything in the picture.
One of the things that's interesting about film directing, and that's why we're having this series, is about the fact that there's responsibilities involved in all shows that are made. Everything from the worst pornography to the highest of art is directed by someone. And as a result, my question to you is, how much responsibility does a director or members of the cast that are involved in a particular show have on the effect on society?
Well, you know, obviously you know that films and literature have an effect, have an emotional effect on people. But it's not the job of literature, art, or popular culture to be the guardian of the mental state of a population. That's asking us to do something we're not equipped to do. Every individual feels his own degree of responsibility or lack of responsibility in one way or another. I wouldn't do a movie about a character that I felt was totally unworthy of my paying attention to for 2 hours. But I don't have some lofty religious or philosophical ideal where I believe that my job is to teach the world, or I'm supposed to be a moralist or a philosopher. I'm supposed to entertain you. That's my primary job.
So you're not going to take any responsibility for all the cross-dressers that happened after Tootsie?
I'm not going to take any responsibility for being the keeper of everybody's mental state. I'm going to take total responsibility for doing a film or a series of films that influence people in a certain way. One of the things that happens when you see a film is that you get to live somebody else's life. And when you live somebody else's life, you understand them in a different way than you do when you're just talking about them objectively. You can be a man and learn what it's like to be a battered woman watching a movie. You can learn what it's like to be a killer. You can learn what it's like to be a criminal. You can learn what it's like to be a priest. You can learn what it's like to be a young boy when you're an old man. You can learn what it's like to be an old man when you're a young boy. That's a part of what happens when you see films, and you try on other personalities and other points of view in some way. And that's going to alter the way you see life. And everybody that makes films is aware of that. But that's different than saying my primary job now is as a teacher, and I'm going to look at the script, and I'm not going to do any script where I don't feel I'm not teaching a moral lesson. You can't do that, because then you just get into something pretentious, I think. Totalitarian countries did that, and what they ended up with was propaganda. I mean, you know, every film that was made in Russia during the Cold War was about purporting the political ideal, or a communist ideal, or you know, a share of the wealth ideal, or whatever. And what you essentially had were beautifully made films that were boring as hell because they were propaganda. And that's what you would have. That's what you would have here if we had a rule that said we're only going to make films that enlighten society. We hope they do. We hope they do. But it's a democracy. You get a lot of crap, bad films, and you get a lot of good films.
Speaking of democracy, you served your country in the United States Army, did you not, back in the 50s, late 50s, is that correct?
Yeah, I was in the Army.
And what did you do in the Army?
Many different things. I was in the Mountain Cold Weather Division in Fort Carson, Colorado, so we skied and did rescue operations. I drove a truck, I wrote military commendations. I had a lot of different jobs.
So when you got out, you went back to see Sandy Meisner and started teaching eventually, did you then?
Yeah, well, I was teaching before I went in the Army, and then I resumed teaching when I got out of the Army.
Now, one of the most important things about Sidney Pollack to us is that you had a start in movies based on your relationship with John Frankenheimer and also Burt Lancaster. You've mentioned that several times. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you met them and how that all kind of came to be?
Well, while I was in the Army, John Frankenheimer took a course in acting and script breakdown from Sanford Meisner, who came to California for the first time and taught us a series of seminars at 20th Century Fox. And like anybody else who came across Meisner, he was deeply affected by the teaching and impressed by the man. I was Meisner's assistant before I was drafted, and when I came back out of the Army, I went back to working with him, and I had an audition for Frankenheimer for a Playhouse 90, and I got the part, I think primarily because I was Meisner's assistant, not because I did a great reading, but John was very impressed by the fact that I was Meisner's assistant, and we got to know each other on that particular show. And then when John did a very big, prestigious Henry James piece called The Turn of the Screw with Ingrid Bergman, which was the first time Ingrid Bergman had ever appeared on television. It was 1959. She was still a very big motion picture star then. He hired me to coach two of the children that were on the show, and it worked well because it's more difficult than it sounds, because I had to stay out of his way. I could not get into directing precisely. I had to find a way of coaching without getting into his turf. So it was a little bit delicate, but it worked well. And subsequently in 1960, he got a huge film to direct with Burt Lancaster and Shelley Winters and Telly Savalas, and he hired me again to come out as a coach for some young actors who were not terribly experienced. And Lancaster saw me on the set and began to ask questions about who I was and what I was doing, and then he started asking me questions about what the process of coaching was about, sometimes, you know, trying to kid me or tease me, and sometimes being dead, all the time being quite serious. And then when the film was over, he called me into his office and suggested strongly that I think about directing, and he went so far as to set up an appointment with a very important guy here in Hollywood who gave me a chance to observe. He owned a studio, to observe for a few months in 1961, and that's eventually how I started directing.
It isn't interesting that Burt Lancaster was one of the first big stars, Hollywood stars, to create his own production company, was he not?
He was the first, yeah. Hatfield Lancaster was one of the very, very first, if not the first, independent production companies that was run by an actor.
So you kind of followed in his magic footsteps here in the last few years, then, haven't you?
Well, there were a lot after. He was the first, but then actors began to do that all the time. I mean, many actors and a lot of directors too. You know, now there's Danny DeVito and Ryan Grazer and Ron Howard, Redford, Scott Wildwood. There are a lot of people that do. Oliver Stone has a production company. We've had, I think, more films than most, not more than Imagine. You know, Ron Howard's company is very successful, and so is Danny DeVito's company, Jersey Films. But usually, these companies are not terribly prolific. They might make a few films. We've made about 26 films as a production company in the 15 years that I've had the company. One
of the things that's interesting about your particular company is that, as you said, the relationships you've set up over the years with people like Dave Rubin and Ron Schwery and a variety of other individuals that you brought to the party, and they all seem to. Dave Grusin happens to be the guy that does all of your music and so on. And is it just a matter of setting up a giant, wonderful group of team to make all this happen?
Well, not quite. I mean, it's nice to work with people that you know, because it saves a lot of time in getting to know them. You develop a kind of shorthand, but not everybody is right for everything. I mean, I've worked with, you know, John Barry and John Williams, as well as Dave Grusin. Dave Grusin has done more for me, but Out of Africa was done by John Barry, Sabrina was done by John Williams. I do work with other composers. When I do a certain kind of film that I feel that Grusin is the rightest guy for, then I work with Dave and like to work with Dave because he's comfortable with me and I'm comfortable with him, and we've done it many times. The same was true with a cinematographer. When I did American films, I worked from the 70s on with a guy named Owen Roisman. When I worked in Europe, I worked with somebody else. You know, he didn't do Out of Africa, you know. It's nice to work with people who know how you think and who know what you want. It saves a lot of time. It's one of the good things about the collaboration I had with Redford over the years. We did 7 films together, and you know, it got to be quite comfortable where, you know, I could raise an eyebrow and he knew what I meant. We wouldn't have to go through a long period of explaining an idea and then risking having it misunderstood, which might happen with somebody who doesn't know you, doesn't know how you sound. And you work a lot when you're working with somebody new just to find their buttons. You're trying to create behavior as a director, and how you create the behavior is complicated psychologically. And until you know the person, you don't know where the buttons are, or how to push them, or what they need to feel comfortable.
It's a lot more comfortable with a group of people you worked with, basically. And one of those things that amazes me is you keep bringing all the boats up. Everyone that you bring to the party seems to, you know, do a great job on other things as well. And one of the things is that we want to point on this is these films you've been shooting the last few years, and I think what's the new one is The Assumption. Is that correct? Is that
Assumption is one of the ones we're trying to produce at the moment.
Now tell us, maybe you can help us with that part of it. You've worked with a variety of different distributors, a variety of different executive producers and producers. How does a film go launch from Cannes, right where you are now? Let's say you have Assumption in the can. I'm just going to use that.
No, we don't have it in the can.
You haven't? You do not have
it? Shot it yet.
Oh, you have not shot it?
No.
Okay.
And we are the producers. We're not working with other producers.
I see.
We are the producers.
Okay.
That's what a production company is. We're Mirage Productions. It's composed of Anthony Minghella and myself, Bill Horberg, Jeff Steer, and David Rubin.
Right.
So we are the producers. I may function as executive producer. Bill Horberg may function as the online producer. We may go to different distributors, as you mentioned. We may go to private financiers and then find domestic distribution through a major company. We've done that. We may find partners we may put together a financing situation between Miramax and a European partner, and let's say Miramax will take the United States and Intermedia or some foreign venue will take Europe. That's what we do on a picture like The Assumption, which is what we're trying to do. On a picture like The Talented Mr. Ripley, we start at a major studio like Paramount, but then we bring in Miramax, which helps us get foreign partners. So that becomes a Miramax Paramount picture, distributed in Europe by third parties in some way. Every one is different. Some films that I've directed have just been totally financed. Most all of them have been totally financed by a major American studio that has affiliations in Europe. Universal Pictures, for example, where we made Out of Africa, is partners with 2 other studios in Europe. It's called Universal International Pictures, UIP. UIP distributes all of the European product for United Artists, Paramount, and Universal. But domestically, each one takes care of their own.
Well, one of the things about distribution that's always been the Hollywood dream, a guy goes out and shoots a show out on the street and wants to get distribution for it in a number of theaters. And there seems to be some mystique to that process. If you can extrapolate it on the higher level rather than the lower level, maybe that'd be interesting too, how you do get international acceptance for your films other than going to Cannes or to Sundance.
Well, we're talking about 2 different things now. Most Hollywood films are paid for and financed by movie studios. Movie studios are essentially distributors. That's how they make their money. They don't make their money paying for movies. They lose money paying for movies. They make their money distributing movies to theaters. Independent movies are financed by independent people. It could be 5 doctors, or it could be a small company which is in the business of financing films, but it does not have a distribution arm. It doesn't know how to go to theaters and sell to theaters. It can't. So after it's paid for the movie and made the movie, it still has to go back to a distributor. The distributor may be a major motion picture company, or it may be a smaller company which is just in the business of distributing. How do you get them to do it? You show them the picture. They look at the picture and they either say, okay, I want to try to sell this, or they say, I don't think I can sell this. There's nothing mystical about it. It's very easy. It's not easy to get them to take it, but it's easy to get them to look at it. You just say, I've got a movie. It just takes them, what, an hour and a half to look at the movie. You look at this movie, it's for sale. And you keep your fingers crossed. And they come out and they say, we really love this. We'll give you $4 million for the domestic rights to this. Or we'll give you $2 million. Let's suppose that you make a picture for $10 million, just to pick a number. You may sell it to the United States for $4 million. And then you may sell it in France for $250,000, and Germany for $500,000, and Italy for $200,000. And what you hope to do is make the $4 million that it costs you to do the picture. Most of the time, you do that before you shoot the picture. You say, I have a picture, it's going to have Michael Caine and Brendan Fraser in it. It's going to be directed by Philip Noyce. It's going to be produced by Anthony Minghella and Sidney Pollack. What will you give us for the domestic rights? Here's the script. Read the script. This is a case of a film we made called The Quiet American, which is about to come out. So we got X dollars from Miramax for domestic distribution only. And then we went country by country and sold it and tried to get, now we didn't get the whole amount. Picture cost around $27 million. We got about 24 million. So the hope is so that the companies that we went to do what's called deficit financing. They finance the bridge between what you have and what you need. They own with you the negative of the movie. Their hope is that over time, even if we don't get the $3 million up front, syndication, airlines, television, cassettes, since they own the license of the movie, that they'll make it that way. There are an infinite number of ways to do this.
There's a prevailing wisdom in America today that there's not a lot of good movies out there anymore. And it's interesting to hear about that from your point of view. In other words, you know, we look back on the history of America and all the great movies that we grew up and saw, and what is either right or wrong with the current mode of Hollywood and the type of shows they're putting out there?
Well, I wouldn't use words like right or wrong. I mean, it's perfectly all right for you to, but I can't do that. I don't believe that there is such a thing in terms of movies. Movies are always were, always have been, and always will be a business. We live in a capitalist society. Most everything in this country is a business. We do not have philanthropists for movies. We have philanthropists for certain charities. We don't have what they had in the Middle Ages or what they have often in Europe, which are patrons of the arts, people who pay to encourage the profligation of highly artistic works. Movies are a commercial product paid for by individuals or stockholders who expect to get their money back and make money. So people that run these funds, that is, heads of studios, heads of financing companies, heads of distribution organizations, are making calculated guesses on what the appetite of the public is. I don't think a lot of fast food is real good for you, but it makes a lot of money. It's what people want.
Well, right now,
we make a lot of fast food. So movies are trying to cater to where the biggest customers are. And right now, more so than at any other time in history, the primary audience commercially for movies is very young people. Younger than it's ever been before. The core audience for movies. So that studios are concerned with and driven by and dominated by trying to choose films where they feel they can capture a young audience. First of all, that young audience not only has the spare time to go to the movies, but somehow they have the money. And they are the repeat customers. They're the customers that come 2 and 3 times to a film. And that's what makes a film do these kind of astronomical numbers. So I wouldn't say it's right or it's wrong. I would just say that the audience has gotten younger and younger and younger, and that's dictated the kinds of movies. And if you look out there at what's doing well, look at the comic books and sequels and things like that. But that doesn't mean that we still don't have really inventive, interesting films. We do. There are just fewer of them. They're swimming upstream in a market dominated by kids' culture, in a way.
let me ask you, this is a supposition here, but you know, you spent a lot of time in television and you did some incredibly great work in television. You did Playhouse 90 and you did Ben Casey, and you did a variety of other things that were wonderful shows that were on television for a number of years. What do you think's happening in today's television market? Why is the apparent, I use that word, apparent quality of the programming a lot less than it was, let's say, when you were involved in television back in the 60s?
Well, first of all, I'm not 100% sure that that's true. I know it's what everybody says, but I think there's some good things on now too. They're just very different. They don't do a lot of anthology shows. In other words, when we had Playhouse 90s and we had Alcoa, Aluminum Hour, and Kraft, and those things, they were original shows, some of them 90 minutes, once a week, and they attracted playwrights of quite a high level who went on to do films or Broadway shows. But we don't have much of that now, but we do have, I think, some of the comedy is so good, in my mind. I mean, I was a crazy Seinfeld fan. There are comedies on that where the writing is of such a high level now. There's a lot of junk on. The truth of the matter is most commercially made products are junk of any kind. Chairs, tables, and then you get a few things that are terrific. Cars, they're all crappy. But you go and you find a handmade, really well-made car, you find a chair that's really put together better than any other chair, and it changes from year to year, but as long as I can remember, let me put it this way, as long as I can remember being in the business, which is almost 40 years, it's been 40 years now, every decade people have said exactly what you said. Why is everything so terrible? It used to be so good. Then the next year they say, why is everything so terrible? It used to be so good. But somehow it survives. Now I agree, I wring my hands and say, geez, a lot of bad movies being made. But then I can remember there were a lot of bad movies made in the 50s and 60s and 70s too. I think that the period 1965 to 1980 was probably the richest period in American movie history, more so than the 30s and 40s and 50s, frankly. And I think that was because of a combination of things. It was partially because America, for the first time in its history, was examining itself on every level, socially, sexually, authoritatively, politically. We were going through revolutions. We were questioning authority. We were questioning parameters of what was considered admirable. We were questioning sexuality. Women were revolting. Gays were coming out in the open and asking for equality. We were attacking the United States government for the first time and suspecting them of being hypocrites and liars. And all of that ferment, there was this terrific influence from European cinema, the New Wave, Godard, Truffaut, Fellini, Antonioni, Ingmar Bergman. They were reinventing the form that we had that we worked on and developed initially. And so this combination, people in colleges every weekend night were in foreign movies. Doesn't happen anymore. Nobody
Well, but let's look to the hope of that, though. The internet has made that next step up. I mean, do you believe really that Americans are questioning their government any less today than they were, let's say in 1975?
Yeah, I do. I believe they're questioned in a very different way. We don't have Vietnam to openly protest. I'm talking about the 60s, where you had Kent State and you had, people were breaking into, there were riots going on all the time. I mean, just the controversy over Jane Fonda, for example, and existed. I don't think we have that quite to the same level today. We have editorials and we have a quieter kind of cynicism. Everybody suspects politicians of being politicians, and everybody suspects that politicians lie to you and say what they think you want to hear. But we don't have the open kind of picketing and being on the barricades and screaming for reform. Something like Enron will cause a big scandal, and the Merrill Lynch, things like those happen. But Vietnam tore this country apart and turned it into a self-doubting, self-questioning country for the first time.
Do you think it's changed any? Do you think that those questions have changed over Vietnam at all?
I think we had a period of euphoria in this country from the collapse of the Iron Curtain until 9/11. We had a period in this country that was the calmest, the richest, the most peaceful, most progressive, most satisfying. There was a sense of well-being. There was a sense that we didn't have a huge, frightful enemy. There was a sense that the economy was growing. There was a sense that each successive generation would have a little more than the last one until 9/11. And now we have another crisis to deal with, which is that.
One of the things that you mentioned, some areas that you really wanted to look at as far as new films. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, one of them was the media, dealing with the media, and the other one was was Hollywood itself, doing shows about Hollywood, and the third one was about politics, about political figures and so on. Have you changed your focus any from a couple of years ago when you mentioned those items about shows that you might be interested in doing?
I still think that Washington is a rich phenomenon for movie examination. Not the Washington of the 30s and the Frank Capra Washington, but the rather cynical Washington that exists today, the complicated, manipulative Washington.
So you believe that Leonard Atwood is still alive and well somewhere?
No, I believe that that Washington is essentially a town that's way too much at the mercy of money, and that the machinations that go on there with lobbyists is astounding and despicable.
Are you going to do a movie about that?
I don't know. Try, we'll see.
When it,
Campaign finance reform is absolutely essential, and it's not seeming to happen. So I'm interested in that. Hollywood, I think, has become interesting to everyone over the years. Not just movies and the glamour of Hollywood, but who's running the studios and how much a picture costs. People read everything about movies today, and so I think that that's a rich area.
well, you've really given back to the society of film by being a part of the Sundance Film Institute, by being a part of American Cinematheque, and a variety of other organizations and things that you put back to. And are we going to do that same thing for television? Are you going to be able to pull out some of these old Playhouse 90s and keep them restored? And are you looking forward to any? Is television redemptive at all? Is there any chance that we're going to be able to save anything that was on television?
Well, I think there are a lot of I'm thrilled with the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, and I watch it endlessly. And I personally am a huge fan of these. I know they're risque and people are bothered by them, but the stuff that's being done on HBO. I mean, I think The Sopranos is, the level of drama in The Sopranos is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And I think that guy David Chase is a genius, and Gandolfini and that whole cast, Elaine Bracco and Edie Falco and all those people are stunning to me to watch. I went on a plane trip not long ago, and it was a private plane, and the guy had the whole library of the first year, and it was a long trip over to Europe, and on the way over we watched half of the whole first year back to back, and on the way back we watched the second half, and it's just stupefying. We didn't have anything like that in the 50s, really.
Well, you did have a variety of shows that represented the times, which was Dr. Kildare and Ben Casey, and a lot of those shows that were relating to healthcare, oddly enough. And now you've got ER and a variety of other healthcare shows today. How do those compare? I don't see any.
Those shows were romanticized versions of healthcare problems. The whole point of ER is to get to the nerve, to make it edgier, just like The Sopranos is. There have been romanticized versions of the mafia, and then there's a guy who's going to a psychiatrist. Here's a guy who kills a guy when he takes his daughter to drop her off in college in the first year and then goes and murders a guy. I mean, you can't do that on television. How can you do that? Well, you do. I mean, they're examining very bold, difficult, dangerous things to examine.
Are you going to go there? Are you going to follow that that edge that has been led by The Sopranos and other great shows that are on TV now? I mean, you're looking forward to new films.
If I was in that area, if I was dumb enough to work in that area, because I would not want to compete with those things that are that good, I certainly would say, you know, you got to take some lessons from something like The Sopranos. If you get into that area, you have to be at least as truthful and as edgy as that is.
Well, that's where, you know, you've got, it seems to me that you've got a lot of career way ahead of you, and we couldn't end this conversation with, well, one of America's greatest directors without mentioning one of your other dear friends that recently passed away, Stanley Kubrick. And you did, and we did not mention, by the way, that you've done a sizable amount of acting throughout the years, and the last one happened to be in Eyes Wide Shut. And
the last one's Changing Lanes.
Oh, Changing Lanes, excuse me. But Eyes Wide Shut was the Stanley film. And do you have any thoughts about how much effect Stanley had on your career and on you as a person?
Well, I think Stanley was a unique director to all of us in a way. He was sort of the first independent director before he was really an independent director. He ran his own show and did his own thing. A long time before other directors had that particular kind of power. He distanced himself somehow from the studios and kept his operations very private and very, very, very unique to himself. You hear the word perfectionism a lot, but Stanley was the first real perfectionist I ever met.
You've mentioned that several times in interviews, and I just want, you know, I mean, it's not doing anything harmful to your friend here, but you didn't want to take the pick for one of your best shows, but would you mind selecting one of Stanley's shows and saying which one was technically, or it didn't have to be let's say the most enjoyable, but technically, which one was the most technically perfect of his shows?
Well, they're all technically perfect. That's what he was. He was always technically perfect. My favorite is just emotionally is Barry Lyndon, because it's the most romantic picture he ever made. That's not the critics' favorite. That's one of their least favorite. They like his tougher stuff, you know. Technically innovative was 2001. At the time that was made, that was a prescient film. Before we had any kind of CGI or digitizing or anything. Now it's easy as hell to do all that stuff. But when he did it, he was way beyond the cutting edge of anything. Trying to do those spaceship docking things. I mean, he was sort of amazing in that stuff. But probably the people, you know, they would all talk about The Killing, Paths of Glory, 2001, Lolita, you know, Clockwork Orange. There's so many of them that are out on the edge somewhere. But the one that was least out on the edge, that was more straightforward Victorian romance in a way, which you don't associate with him, was Barry Lyndon. I could watch Barry Lyndon any day of the week and get totally lost in it, because it's a real once upon a time there was this guy. He sets out on these adventures, and it's so beautiful to look at and so simply done. It's an exquisite movie.
Well, we can say the same for many of your movies, sir. Especially 3 Days of the Condor happens to be our favorite, along with so many others that are major breakthroughs, and we certainly congratulate you for all the awards you've won, and we want to thank you for being on the cutting edge, and we can't thank you enough for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.